And for the occupiers, Pokrovsk, Sumy, Kharkiv, the Ukrainian armed forces leave the enemy no chance. Putin, in a panic, is throwing everything into a breakthrough. Thousands of casualties every day. Bunker Dweller is losing his army. A meat grinder 24/7, occupiers are in hysteria. The Ukrainian armed forces strike without mercy. Watch the explosive details right now.
More than 170 battles in a single day, a third of them on the most difficult section of the front near Pokrovsk. The defense of this city, which has taken down thousands of Russian assault troops in just a couple of months, is holding strong. The Kremlin decided to bypass the impregnable fortress.
The enemy has set themselves the task of advancing far enough to encircle Pokrovsk and the Nervograd agglomeration and to use the so-called Avdiivka tactic, namely to destroy the defense or weaken it as much as possible by delivering artillery and air strikes against the group of troops defending there. That is why we are now seeing such desperate attempts by the enemy to break through around Pokrovsk from the north in order to create a pocket that would allow them to concentrate their firepower precisely in this direction.
In recent days, Russian attacks have also intensified in the Sumy direction. The enemy has been stopped there, but attempts to storm the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces with small groups do not cease for even a day. Russians are dying by the hundreds in the so-called kill zone, where Ukrainian drones destroy any assault groups. At the same time, the occupiers have decided to use a new tactic. Under the cover of night, wearing camouflage cloaks, they slowly advance by dozens of meters. This tactic is especially popular in the city of Vovchansk near the aggregate plant.
At night, the Russians...
At night, assault troops try to infiltrate the plant's territory wearing anti-thermal imaging ponchos, hoping that this way they will be invisible to our aerial reconnaissance. And, as a rule, after they infiltrate, they try to hide in the ruins or in basement rooms. These are the only places where they can store ammunition, water, or concentrate manpower. But even such places are usually found by our aerial reconnaissance, and then we use all necessary means to smoke the Russians out and destroy them.
The day before, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported a new attempt by the occupiers to break through in the Kharkiv region. A crossing of the Ukrainian border was recorded near the village of Milov. However, at present, the saboteurs have been pinned down by fighting and their advance has been stopped.
They are trying to attack in different directions. 2 weeks ago, active operations began near the settlement of Milov, which is northeast of Veliki Burluk. There, Russian troops did indeed cross the border and tried to advance into the village of Amban, but were stopped. Then they changed direction and attempted to move toward the village of Khatne, but also failed. They continue to look for weak spots in our defenses. If they think they found such a spot, they will amass infantry there to try to build on their success.
Petro Andriushchenko, head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, reports that by the end of July, Russia will attempt a second wave of offensive in the Zaporizhzhia direction. According to him, enemy manpower and equipment are currently being built up in the region. Reserves are also being transferred to this direction of the attack. Analysts say that there still aren't enough resources for any large-scale offensive. However, in the coming weeks, the situation here will also remain quite tense.
In recent days, we've seen the situation deteriorate, with renewed Russian attempts to advance in the Huliaipol area, closer to the border in Donetsk region near Malinivka. We can see that active combat operations have resumed there. They have made some limited progress there so far. And now we see that since yesterday, they've started moving the reserves. They had more to the north, closer to the coastline. They're now starting to bring them closer to the actual front line.
At the same time, fighting continues to some extent along the entire front line. 5,500 shellings in just the last 24 hours. Having received the last 50 days for war from Trump, Putin is desperately trying to snatch whatever his thugs can manage before it's over.
When we talk about the 11 distinct directions where the Russian forces are currently attacking, it's critically important to fully understand that in some specific areas the attacks are primarily tactical in nature, while in other, more intense locations, it's undeniably a brutal and relentless meat grinder. This is indeed the primary direction of the enemy's significant strikes, where many thousands of artillery shells, numerous FPV drones, various other destructive weapons, and massive aerial bombs are continuously fired and deployed in a single intense day. Up to 1,000 people are killed or put out of action by the Russian defenses.
Let me remind you, earlier the Western press reported that this year's Russian summer offensive has been the deadliest for them throughout the entire war. Every day, the Ukrainian armed forces eliminate 1,000 or more Kremlin soldiers.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A blow straight to the heart of Russia. The EU will invest billions in Ukraine. The bunker dweller is in a panic. The EU is changing the rules of the game and now pro-Russian agents are blocked. Soon Ukraine will be a member of the European Union. This is the funeral of Russia's influence in Europe.
Trillions of euros for the European Union and billions of euros for Ukraine. The EU is forming a budget for the next 10 years, which already includes funds for the post-war reconstruction of Ukraine, humanitarian programs, and efforts to integrate official Kyiv into the European Union. In particular, the draft of the new European Union budget for 2028-2034 was presented by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It is planned to amount to 2 trillion euros. According to the official, the budget is strategic and is intended to increase the ability to respond quickly to unexpected challenges, as well as to cover already foreseeable expenses, such as the reconstruction of Ukraine.
We are allocating 100 billion euros for Ukraine. You know, we have a fund for the reconstruction of Ukraine. At first, after an interim analysis, it amounted to 50 billion. These amounts are gradually decreasing. That is why we are proposing 100 billion euros to replenish the Ukrainian fund, support reconstruction, resilience, and of course, their path to EU membership.
The money is planned to be allocated for the restoration of affected regions, infrastructure projects to strengthen our country's defense capability, and various humanitarian programs such as support for veterans or assistance to children. At the same time, as expected, such record-breaking investments in Ukraine have once again encountered obstacles from some EU members, including both Putin's allies and supporters of official Kyiv, each pursuing their own interests.
The issue of aid to Ukraine and the allocation of 100 billion has already, as they say, caused concern in Budapest with Viktor Orban. Well, that's understandable. Germany is also opposed to such an increased European Union budget. In particular, government spokesperson Cornelius stated that as countries are now trying to increase their national budgets, they are mobilizing to consolidate these budgets specifically for defense spending rather than for increasing the overall budget of the European Union. But as they say, now is not the time for that.
However, the majority of EU members support such financial programs for the next 10 years. This includes support for the amount allocated to official Kyiv, considering that by that time Ukraine may already be part of the EU. Even if integration processes are still ongoing, a stable situation in our country is beneficial to the vast majority of EU members.
In any case, it is clear that the European Union is interested in providing financial support to Ukraine because, one way or another, much within the European Union itself depends on financial stability in Ukraine. But there is also a rather strong subversive network within the EU itself, which is openly supported by Russia and pursues a pro-Russian policy.
At the same time, in the new budget, all financial packages for member states will be conditional on adherence to the rule of law. This is a key change in response to the rollback of democracy in Hungary, von der Leyen noted. There is also active discussion not only about changing the principle of financing EU countries, but also the principle of voting. After all, over the past few years, Hungary itself has shown that the system is far from perfect.
In the end, the European Union will have to develop some tools that will allow it to implement decisions in the interest of the EU without the possibility that, for example, a single pro-Russian government could block them for some time.
In turn, analysts believe that the idea of a 100 billion investment is undoubtedly excellent. Now it would be good to move from ideas to action, and the main task of the EU today is to create a mechanism where the opinion of the majority can be implemented without hindrance, rather than being endlessly blocked by individual politicians.
Putin's missile nightmare.